What happens when heroes fly too high and the world simply forgets them? The 1960s and 70s were overflowing with capes, cosmic powers, and bold experiments that tried to turn comic books into television magic. Some shows soared, others vanished into the shadows of syndication. These weren't just cartoons. They were time capsules of ambition, color, and chaos. Let's rewind the reel and uncover 15 superhero cartoons that once thrilled the world and then disappeared without a trace. Number 15, The Freedom Force, 1978. This was supposed to be the dream team of forgotten heroes. The Freedom Force brought together legends like Hercules, Isis, Merlin, and even Sinbad in one daring animated lineup. Produced by Filmation, it premiered in 1978 as part of the Tarzan and the Super 7 block. The idea was ambitious ancient myths joining forces to fight futuristic villains. But the show had a problem. No one could figure out what it wanted to be. Was it a mythic adventure or a superhero show? One episode had robots and laser beams. The next felt like a lost chapter from Greek mythology. Viewers were confused, and networks didn't know how to sell it. Despite having rich animation for its time and dramatic music cues, it never gained traction. Behind the scenes, Filmation faced tight budgets and reused footage from other shows, forcing heroes to strike the same poses over and over again. Audiences noticed. Even the mighty Hercules couldn't save the show from fading away. After just 5 short episodes, the Freedom Force vanished from television, leaving behind only grainy VHS tapes and nostalgia for what could have been. It was a team meant to rival the Justice League, but ended up as a trivia question in animation history. Number 14, Web Woman, 1978. Before Spider-Man ruled the airwaves, there was Web Woman, a mysterious superheroine who controlled the power of insects. Produced by Filmation in 1978, this short-lived series told the story of Kelly Webster, a NASA scientist who gained strange powers from an alien encounter. Using her web dome, she battled villains with insect-inspired technology. On paper, it sounded perfect for a decade fascinated with space exploration and environmental awareness. But reality hit hard. The show's animation was rushed, and the writing veered between science fiction and fantasy without a clear direction. Audiences couldn't decide whether Web Woman was meant to be thrilling or educational. Critics called it too weird for kids, too simple for adults. Censors also grew uneasy with its insect imagery, leading to toned-down designs that stripped the series of its eerie originality. Meanwhile, Filmation's relentless production schedule meant backgrounds were recycled and action scenes repeated endlessly. After only 7 episodes, Web Woman vanished into obscurity. Yet her existence marked a milestone, one of the earliest animated shows to feature a solo female superhero lead. Forgotten by most, she remains a fascinating relic of an era trying to imagine what equality looked like in a world of capes and cosmic power. Number 13. Super Friends, 1973. This wasn't just a cartoon. It was a statement, a bright, hopeful vision of teamwork during a decade defined by uncertainty. Super Friends, produced by Hanna-Barbera, brought together Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman under one colorful banner. Premiering in 1973, it aimed to teach moral lessons and promote cooperation, but not everyone was impressed. Critics called it soft, claiming the heroes talked too much and fought too little. Networks had demanded that violence be minimized, turning many battles into polite debates. Some parents loved that restraint. Kids didn't. They wanted action, not endless speeches about teamwork. Despite the complaints, Super Friends became the backbone of Saturday mornings for nearly a decade. Over time, new heroes joined Flash, Green Lantern, and even the Wonder Twins, transforming it into a massive animated universe. Still, its earliest version feels like a time capsule from a gentler age, where heroes solved problems through patience instead of punches. It was mocked for being tame, but it quietly shaped generations of viewers who grew up believing that real power came from unity. Forgotten? Maybe. But without Super Friends, modern superhero animation might never have learned how to bring the Justice League to life. Number 12. The Mighty Heroes, 1966. If you've ever wondered what would happen if superheroes were bad at their jobs, the Mighty Heroes had the answer. Debuting in 1966 from Terry Toons, this bizarre and comedic series featured a team of underdogs: Strongman, Rope Man, Tornado Man, Cuckoo Man, and Diaper Man. Yes, Diaper Man. The show was pure chaos. Every episode began with a disaster in Good Haven, followed by the heroes fumbling their way to victory. It was fast, noisy, and completely ridiculous, but it worked. For a while, the exaggerated animation style and manic energy stood out in an era dominated by stiff action shows. Kids loved the slapstick humor, but adults dismissed it as nonsense. Behind the scenes, the creators were experimenting. They wanted to parody the rising superhero craze, showing what would happen if the heroes were just regular folks trying to do their best. But television networks didn't quite get the joke. After just 20 episodes, it was quietly canceled. Still, The Mighty Heroes became a cult classic decades later, cherished for its surreal comedy and unapologetic weirdness. It proved that even in the age of mighty men and cosmic crusaders, there was still room for laughter, and maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't ready for heroes who couldn't take themselves too seriously. Number 11. Batfink, 1966. "My wings are like a shield of steel." That line echoed through countless living rooms in 1966 as Batfink soared onto screens. Created as a tongue-in-cheek parody of Batman, the show followed Batfink and his loyal sidekick Karate as they battled over-the-top villains in short, snappy adventures. Unlike its darker inspirations, Batfink leaned into humor and absurdity. Its simple animation and repetitive gags were part of the charm, but also its downfall. Produced on a shoestring budget, episodes reused the same sound effects, punchlines, and backgrounds. Yet, somehow, the formula worked at least for a while. Children adored Batfink's exaggerated bravado and catchy one-liners, but critics tore it apart. Some said it mocked superheroes instead of celebrating them. Others argued it was too violent for kids, even though most fights ended with a joke. Behind the laughter, there was clever satire. The show playfully exposed how television had turned superheroes into products rather than legends. Despite over 100 episodes, Batfink vanished from syndication by the early 70s. For years, it was almost impossible to find until fans resurrected it online. Today, Batfink stands as a reminder that even the silliest parody can outlast the stories it mocks, and sometimes, the wings of humor really are made of steel. Number 10. Aquaman, 1967. He was the king of the seven seas and the butt of every cartoon joke that followed. In 1967, Filmation gave Aquaman his own animated series, riding the wave of DC Comics' television success. Kids expected a mighty underwater saga filled with heroic battles and oceanic grandeur. What they got instead was something a little stranger. Aquaman, with his bright orange suit and sidekick Aqualad, zipped across recycled blue backdrops, battling fish-shaped villains and sea monsters that looked suspiciously familiar from earlier episodes. The animation was stiff, the dialogue even stiffer, but for a brief moment, it worked. The color palette was bold, the sound effects booming, and the underwater kingdom of Atlantis looked alive, at least to a child's imagination. Parents, however, weren't convinced. Some worried the endless underwater action encouraged risky swimming stunts, while critics rolled their eyes at its predictable storylines. Still, for young viewers in the late 60s, it was a spectacle of coral castles, electric eels, and justice beneath the waves. Aquaman lasted 2 seasons before fading from syndication, quietly eclipsed by flashier heroes like Superman and Batman. But in hindsight, this cartoon gave the Sea King his first animated voice, a legacy that would resurface decades later when pop culture finally decided to take him seriously. Sometimes, the tides of memory just take a few decades to turn. Number 9. Spider-Man 1967. You can hear it already, can't you? That jazzy theme, Spider-Man, echoed through living rooms in 1967 when Peter Parker finally swung into television history. Produced by Grantray Lawrence Animation, this was the first time Marvel's teenage hero leapt from page to screen. The show started strong. The first season adapted real comic book storylines, complete with villains like the Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus. But behind the scenes, chaos was brewing. The studio ran out of money halfway through production, forcing drastic cuts. By the second and third seasons, animation became psychedelic and strange. Backgrounds turned into swirling colors, villains morphed into cosmic shapes, and entire sequences were reused multiple times per episode. For many kids, though, none of that mattered. They were mesmerized by the music, the moody atmosphere, and the sense that this version of Spider-Man existed in a lonely urban dreamscape. Critics, however, called it sloppy and bizarre. Parents complained it was too dark, too strange, too offbeat. By 1970, the web snapped. The show ended abruptly, leaving behind a legacy of surreal imagery and an unforgettable song that outlived everything else about it. Forgotten as a series, but immortal in sound, this version of Spider-Man proved that sometimes style, not polish, defines a legend. Number 8. Fantastic Four, 1967. Marvel's first family should have conquered television with ease. When Fantastic Four premiered in 1967, fans expected cosmic adventure and emotional depth. What they got was something far more limited, literally. Produced by Hanna-Barbera, the series looked grand on the surface, but was weighed down by tiny budgets. Whole action scenes were lifted from earlier episodes, with the Thing throwing the same punch week after week, and the Human Torch looping the same flame animation until viewers could predict every move. Critics joked that even Dr. Doom looked bored. Still, the writing tried to keep pace with the comics. Episodes brought in familiar faces like Galactus and Silver Surfer, introducing young audiences to Marvel's grand mythology. But network censors interfered. The Human Torch's fiery powers caused safety concerns, leading to edits that trimmed his screen time and dulled the show's impact. After one short season, the team was gone from television. Yet, despite its flaws, it laid the foundation for every animated Marvel universe that followed. The Fantastic Four cartoon was flawed, cheap, and inconsistent, but it was also the first time cosmic storytelling found its way into kids' Saturday mornings. A pioneer that burned fast, but bright enough to be remembered. Number 7. The New Adventures of Superman, 1966. When Superman returned to the screen in 1966, kids were thrilled. At last, the Man of Steel was back, animated, heroic, and ready to fight the forces of evil. The New Adventures of Superman was Filmation's breakout success, and for a brief time, it seemed unstoppable. Each episode featured the familiar cast Clark Kent, Lois Lane, and Jimmy Olsen, alongside villains like Brainiac and Lex Luthor. The stories were simple but fast-paced, filled with rescues, laser battles, and speeches about truth and justice. It was pure heroism in Technicolor. Then came the complaints. Parents' groups accused the show of promoting aggression, pointing to Superman's frequent use of brute strength to solve problems. Censors stepped in, forcing Filmation to rewrite scripts and soften the action. As a result, later episodes lost their energy, turning once dynamic battles into repetitive scenes of dialogue and moral lessons. Behind the scenes, Filmation struggled with costs, relying on limited animation that made Superman's cape flutter on loop while everything else stood still. The show's spirit dimmed under censorship pressure. Still, it made history. It reintroduced Superman to an entirely new generation and paved the way for decades of DC animation. Forgotten by many, this was the show that taught television how to make a comic book hero fly on a budget. Number 6. Super President, 1967. Now here's a concept that aged like a fever dream. Super President, released in 1967, imagined the leader of the United States moonlighting as a masked superhero. Yes, while other presidents gave speeches, This one secretly fought aliens and criminals using powers from cosmic radiation. Even for the freewheeling 60s, it was wild. The idea came from Depatia Freleng Enterprises, the same studio behind Pink Panther, and it was meant to symbolize patriotism at its boldest. Instead, it triggered outrage. Critics called it tasteless and absurd, arguing that mixing politics with fantasy was dangerous. After all, this was the decade of real-world tensions and global unrest. Behind the curtain, the animation team did their best to treat the idea seriously. Each episode featured the president transforming into a superhero to save the nation from bizarre threats, giant robots, monsters, or cosmic disasters. But audiences couldn't stop laughing. Letters poured in from parents who found it inappropriate, while networks grew nervous about the satire hiding beneath the cape. Within a year, Super President was gone, canceled, condemned, and practically erased from reruns. Today, it survives only in archival clips and fan uploads. Yet, its very existence feels like a time capsule, a reminder of when animation dared to mix patriotism with pure imagination and discovered just how thin that line could be. Number 5. Samson and Goliath, 1967. It sounded like the perfect formula: ancient power meets modern animation. Samson and Goliath, released in 1967 by Hanna-Barbera, followed a teenage boy and his loyal dog, who transformed into super-powered warriors by striking together and shouting their names. The result? Samson became a muscular hero, and Goliath turned into a massive lion made of pure might. The show mixed mythology, science fiction, and monster-of-the-week storytelling. Each episode sent the pair across the globe battling aliens, mad scientists, or giant robots threatening humanity. It was flashy, fast, and full of energy, but also incredibly repetitive. The transformation scenes recycled endlessly, the villains blurred together, and the animation budget never quite matched the show's ambition. Parents raised eyebrows over the constant action, while some critics found the magical chant a little too strange for comfort. Behind the scenes, Hanna-Barbera was juggling multiple series at once, spreading its creative teams thin. As a result, Samson and Goliath looked cheaper than its rivals like Space Ghost or Birdman. After one brief season, the show vanished from syndication, forgotten beneath the studio's bigger hits. Yet, decades later, its legacy quietly roared back through nostalgic fans who rediscovered it online. Samson and Goliath stands today as a symbol of how bold ideas can fall victim to overwork, and how even forgotten heroes can roar again when the time is right. Number 4. Birdman and the Galaxy Trio, 1967. Before Harvey Birdman made him a joke, Birdman was dead serious. Premiering in 1967, Birdman and the Galaxy Trio represented Hanna-Barbera's most ambitious attempt at cosmic adventure. Powered by the energy of the sun, Birdman fought villains from his hidden volcano base, his booming voice echoing, "Birdman!" before unleashing solar justice. The second half of the show introduced the Galaxy Trio, a team of space heroes with outlandish abilities. A man who could stretch, another who could multiply, and one who controlled elemental forces. Together, they defended the universe in short, fast-paced episodes that felt bigger than the budget could handle. But that budget was the problem. Hanna-Barbera reused animation frames so often that audiences noticed the same explosion or laser blast repeating episode after episode. Critics complained about its mechanical dialogue and endless stock footage. Parents, already wary of animated violence, sent letters demanding networks calm down the action. Despite the backlash, Birdman became iconic for a generation of kids who loved his glowing wings and commanding tone. The series didn't last long, but its imagery survived so much so that when Adult Swim revived the character decades later as a parody, fans instantly recognized him. Birdman and the Galaxy Trio was forgotten for years, yet it still burns bright in the collective memory proof that solar heroes never fade completely. Number 3. Rocket Robin Hood, 1966. Take one part medieval folklore, one part space opera, and you get Rocket Robin Hood, one of the strangest cartoons ever to air. Produced in Canada in 1966, it imagined the legendary outlaw as a futuristic hero who robbed from interstellar tyrants and gave to the poor colonists of outer space. The premise alone was wild enough, but the execution took it to another level. Characters lived in New Sherwood Forest, an asteroid surrounded by cosmic trees, and traveled in rocket ships shaped like arrows. Each episode featured bold narration, trippy colors, and heavy-handed moral lessons. Unfortunately, the budget couldn't match its ambition. Animation was crude and frequently recycled, with long pauses covered by dramatic voiceovers. Viewers quickly noticed how awkwardly characters moved, sometimes freezing mid-action to save money. Critics mocked it as science fiction on a shoestring. Parents weren't thrilled either, complaining about the endless ray gun fights and exploding space castles. And yet, Rocket Robin Hood endured for 3 seasons thanks to syndication. It became a cult favorite for kids who found its surreal tone oddly hypnotic. Today, it lives online as a psychedelic time capsule, a reminder that the 1960s weren't afraid to mix the impossible with the absurd. It didn't make sense, but that was exactly why it mattered. Number 2. Space Angel, 1962. Long before CGI or motion capture, a small studio tried something truly unsettling. Space Angel, which debuted in 1962, used a strange technique called synchrovox, where live-action mouths were superimposed onto static cartoon faces. The result? Characters looked both alive and lifeless, like talking portraits adrift in space. The show followed Scott McCloud, a heroic space pilot defending Earth from cosmic threats. It had all the right ingredients for a Cold War-era hit: aliens, rockets, and high-stakes battles, but something about it felt off. The stiff animation and eerie mouth movements unsettled children and baffled adults. Still, it found a small audience fascinated by its sci-fi themes and haunting visuals. Behind the scenes, production was frantic. Over 200 episodes were churned out in just a few years, many reusing the same story beats. The constant repetition and low quality doomed it in syndication. Yet, Space Angel deserves credit. It brought real space tension to early television and hinted at the paranoia of the Cold War in a way no other cartoon dared. Today, it's a cult relic, half nightmare and half nostalgia. Watching it feels like peering into a dream where comic book optimism met atomic age anxiety. Strange, haunting, unforgettable Space Angel remains a cosmic ghost from the dawn of animated heroism. Number 1. The Mighty Hercules, 1963. Before the age of Marvel and DC dominance, one hero tried to bring ancient myth to Saturday mornings. The Mighty Hercules, debuting in 1963, was a Canadian production that reimagined the Greek demigod as a clean-cut animated savior armed with a magic ring that gave him superhuman strength. At first glance, it was a hit. Kids loved the Aidsu, catchy theme song, and the simple battles between Hercules and sorcerers, monsters, or scheming gods. But underneath the muscle and mythology, trouble brewed. The show's tiny budget forced endless repetition, Hercules lifting the same boulder, throwing the same punch, and grinning the same grin week after week. Critics called it animation on autopilot. Parents weren't pleased either. Some felt it was too intense. Others thought it was too dull. The recycled animation became a running joke, and its once epic stories turned into formulaic lessons. Yet, against all odds, The Mighty Hercules ran for nearly 5 years thanks to syndication. Today, it survives only through grainy recordings and nostalgic memories. But in its own way, it paved the road for myth-based animation that followed. Hercules may have faded from screens, but his echo remains the first cartoon god of the superhero era, still flexing somewhere in television's forgotten Olympus. From underwater kings to presidents with capes, these forgotten heroes defined an era when imagination had no limits and budgets had no mercy. They stumbled, glitched, and vanished, but they built the foundation for everything that came after. Which one do you remember watching? Which deserves a comeback? Tell us in the comments, share your favorites, and don't forget to subscribe for more lost legends of animation, because sometimes the past still wears a cape.